Good afternoon, folks. This is my belated recap on the Ramayana. Again, for those of you who were out or who may be following on YouTube, um, last week we covered the Ramayana in class. I'm going to try to make this recap kind of brief. Um, there's just some basic ideas of the Ramayana that I feel are essential to understanding the text. Obviously, I'm not going to recount the entire plot of this massive work. I'm reading the Vivek de Broy translation right now. I've got probably in total about, 7 translations of the Ramayana probably, but the Vivek de Broy is the definitive reader's edition. In any event, it's 2,000 plus pages and so forth. And that's the Valmiki Ramayana, which is actually the shorter version. So in any case, one of the key concepts of the Ramayana to understand is the concept of Dharma, which I talked a little bit about last time. I said metaphorically that it is the force, in the sense that there's a saying that if you protect Dharma, then Dharma protects. If you destroy Dharma, then Dharma destroys. So it's this light side, dark side kind of dichotomy, in a sense. But another aspect of Dharma is essential quality. So the essential quality of water, for example, would be wetness, right? Um, and this will become even more apparent and significant as we get into Arjuna's dilemma, actually tomorrow in class, in the Bhagavad Gita, in the question of, is he following his Dharma, and what are the consequences for following Dharma versus not. But with Rama, you have the embodiment of ideal Dharma according to this text and according to the tradition. It's important to note that this is a living tradition. Rama is revered by millions of people as the 7th incarnation of Vishnu, and he's understood to be the perfect enact or embodiment of Dharma. And really a lot of this is glossed over, in the sense that the popular story of Ram, of course, is that he's exiled for 14 years. He goes and rescues Sita from Ravana, and there's a big battle, and Ravana, who's the organic Death Star, if you will, is destroyed. Very much the rescue the space princess plot of Star Wars. In fact, I mean, instead of Chewbacca, again, we have our hairy sidekick Hanuman, which in our material for this last week, we had the Hanuman comic that depicts Hanuman lifting a mountain and bringing herbs to Lakshman and Ram to revive them, and shows Hanuman as the ideal servant. Thereby, he is revered still to this day. In fact, legend has it, I don't have any way to verify this, but legend has it that former President Obama had an Indian roommate who told him of Hanuman, and said that those who go under the banner of Hanuman or the flag of Hanuman, they can't be defeated. And of course, Hanuman's flag is on Arjuna's chariot at the Battle of Kurukshetra. But in any case, it is said, again, this is legend. This is not necessarily fact, but this is legend, that President Obama carries a Hanuman, a little murti of Hanuman in his pocket, uh, based on what his Indian roommate had told him about Hanuman. So, in any case, so again, if you watch the anime, and you um, looked at some of the other materials, um, in the folders, right? You saw this basic arc that is very celebrated, and shows Ram as this king of Dharma, right? Um, but the anime notably cuts out, and I put these passages for you to read in the quote unquote epilogue of the Sita's ordeal, and then the epilogue of the um, Ramayana, Ramayana, just depending on if you are a Hindi speaker or not. But anyway, and I'm not. I know some Hindi, but not fluent, of course. Neither am I fluent in Sanskrit, but I know a little bit of Sanskrit. But anyway, uh, the 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 point is that I linked those passages for you and from the Krishna Dharma translation. Krishna Dharma, incidentally, is a believer in Ram, certainly, and so he approaches the text with a little bit of reverence, and there's a little bit of liturgical language probably in his translation, but his translation is very digestible prose. It's available for free online, legally, put out there by Krishna Dharma. So, you know, and that's what we have in our course. But if you're watching this on YouTube and you're interested, you can find it online for free. Um, Obviously, without the illustrations, et cetera, et cetera. But the text. Anyway, my point is that in the tradition and the culture that Ram is coming from, and this is not, this is a much higher, more elevated culture, say, than present day India, or even classic, quote unquote, classical India. This is a very uh, very strict in a sense culture. I mean, you could move, say, for example, in caste at that time, or in the legendary time, depending on if you um, believe this to be historical or if you believe this to be myth or legend. Actually, myth can also be historical, because myth is a means by which one uses narrative to um, signify one's reality, essentially. But usually, so myth is not. I mean, colloquially, people say myth is lying, but it's actually not. In any case, the historicity of this, of course, is debatable. But as I said in class, there is the bridge between Sri Lanka and India that has been discovered, which um, plays an important role in um, this, the retrieval of Sita, the rescue of Sita, and then the war between Rama and Ravana. So, in any case, in this culture, a wife, especially the wife of a kshatriya or a warrior, literally kshatriya means one who protects by harm or protects through hurting. But and so we're talking about kings. We're talking about if we were talking about like a D&D class, just to use as a metaphor, we'd be talking about paladins, right? We'd be talking about these very high idealed uh, warriors, right? So they're the women of this caste, right? They were expected not to spend um, 24 hours or more in the residence of another man. Um, and so when Ram in Hindi, Rama in Sanskrit, when Rama uncovers or rescues Sita, as she insists he does, because remember, she will not go back with Hanuman, right? She must go back with Ram because it's his duty, right? It's his dharma, if you will, to rescue her. So, in any case, and again, from in class, we talked about the grand romance of Ram and Sita up to this point. Um, Ram, of course, breaks the bow of Lord Shiva, and indicating, of course, that that could be read as Lord Vishnu or Rama being in a superior position to Lord Shiva, depending on how one chooses to read that. It's certainly, if we go back through the bow metaphors that we've already seen, like the rainbow in the Noah story, and we'll see this again in the Odyssey when Telemachus is unable to string his father's bow. Again, bows represent masculine potency or agency, right? So Ram, in breaking, not only lifting but breaking Lord Shiva's bow, seems to indicate that, at least in this text, that Rama, thereby Vishnu, is in a superior positioning according to agency, at least in that scenario, right? So anyway, there begins the grand romance of Ram and Sita, and very famously, Ram vows not to take another wife, right? And these Kshatriya kings, that they often have multiple wives. Ram's own father has 3 wives, and that's part of the uh, the conundrum that leads to his exile, etc. Right? But anyway, he vows to only have Sita, and so they're understood to be this incredible couple that is in love with one another and so forth. The problem is, right, that Sita has been away from Ram for a year, or just about a year, when he comes and rescues her. And so there's this question, you know, was she unfaithful to Ram, having been in the home of another man for this time? And so she asks for fire to be lit. And she says, if I have been unfaithful, I am going, let me be burnt up in the fire, right? So she goes into the fire, and of course, she is not consumed. And then, Ram is like, wonderful, I didn't doubt you at all, but we had to do this because we are demonstrating again the dharma of royalty, for the sake of the common people and so on and so forth, right? So, right, no big deal, right? You think, okay, we're going to go back home, and of course, when they go back home, this is commemorated still to this day, in part in the festival of Diwali. Diwali is also a festival of the goddess Durga, right? But it's also a festival of Ram's return to Ayodhya as well. Um, and so and if you haven't attended the Diwali festival, I wholeheartedly recommend it. COVID restrictions allowing, excellent food, great music, so on and so forth. We have a really good one here in San Antonio. Um, I saw the mayor dancing there a couple years ago. So anyway, um, yeah, so they returned to Ayodhya. Well, things seem to be going okay for a few months, right? And then Lakshman comes in and tells Ram, because Lakshman, of course, is his great confidant because they spent so many years together, right, in the forest, and they're best friends. And he says, we have a little bit of a problem. Uh, People are talking, right, because they still don't believe that Sita was faithful to you. Um, And so Ram, even though he 100% believes Sita, Rama says, well, I'm gonna have to I'm gonna have to exile her because I can't have people doubting my judgment and my decisions and so forth. And so this is actually this is quite an emotional moment because Sita already wanted to go back to Chitrakoot, to the forest, because she remembered how idyllic it was, before the whole Ravana incident, and she wanted to go back and visit. So she and Lakshman had already planned to go back. He was going to escort her back for the day and so forth, and they were going to go visit. So he does that, right? But then when they get there, he says, "I'm sorry." He's in tears. He says, Rama says you can't go back. You have to stay here. Right? So you can imagine how heartbroken Sita is at this point. And he says, "Well, go find the sage Valmiki and stay in his ashram." Um, so she proceeds to do that. She is with Valmiki for going on, I think it's 14 years or 13 years, something like that. But the key point here is that she was also pregnant um, when she was exiled, pregnant with the twins Luv and Kush. Now, in the sort of the original Valmiki text, that's not a prose retelling of the text. Luv and Kush actually show up in the very beginning because Valmiki is talking about the composition of the Ramayana, and he says, "Well, who can I train to recite this poem?" And of course, it's Luv and Kush because they are the sons of Rama. Not only are they the sons of Rama, but they look exactly like Rama. Now, this is interesting because we also saw this with Enkidu and Gilgamesh, right? We saw Enkidu and Gilgamesh being mirror images of one another. We see this with Luv and Kush, uh, with Rama, right? And in fact, we're uh, we're not going to read about Krishna's son, but one of Krishna's sons looks exactly like him also. Okay, so we so this is interesting in this ancient literature that we see this going on. But in any case, Liv and Kush are trained as they're growing up by Valmiki to recite this Ramayana. So they go to uh, Ayodhya ultimately as teenagers and or preteens really, and they start reciting this poem, and they become very, very well known very, very quickly, and ultimately come before Ram. And Rama recognizes who they are upon seeing them, and he decides that it's time to call Sita back. And when he does this, they have this sort of reconciling, and ultimately the earth opens up and comes and reclaims Sita, right? Um, because she was born of the earth originally. So the earth opens up and reclaims her, and Ram continues to rule in Ayodhya for, um, according to the text, thousands of years. Ultimately, Death shows up one day and says, and we've met Death before. We met Yamaraj before. He shows up one day in disguise, and ultimately has a private audience with Ram and Rama, and says, "Hey, your time on Earth is coming to an end. It's time for you to go back to your abode." It's interesting that in the classical Hindu, in the itihasas, the histories, these grand narratives, right? You can have multiple avatars, say of Vishnu, at one time, and meeting each other and conversing and interacting. For example, Rama meets Parasuram, who's another avatar of Lord Vishnu, and he recognizes him, and he says, okay, my time here is done because you're here now. Ultimately they have this altercation, but in any case, that's kind of fascinating to me. And to me, that speaks of the vastness of the divine that is purported in these texts. But in any case, um, Bharat ultimately does, become king after Rama, and of course, there's a lot we can make of the lifespans of these individuals and so forth. Is this legend? Is this, is there some historical basis for people that long lived? I mean, that's certainly beyond the purview of this discussion. But there's a whole lot of information out there either way, right? We already talked about the Aryan invasion theory and so forth, and the problematic dating of these texts. But I wanted to mention that narrative arc within the Ramayana because what we see here is we kind of see Sita, getting the short end of the stick. I mean, actually, that's a really disgusting metaphor. The short end of the stick, for those of you that don't know, refers to, we're going to be talking about Greece and Rome in a few weeks. Actually, next week we'll be starting to talk about Greece and then Rome. But so short end of the stick is there would people would defecate in public troughs, right? And they would pass around this wiping stick, and everybody would use the same wiping stick. So short end of the stick referred to, getting that last bit of stick to wipe oneself. So anyway, it's a really disgusting metaphor. But anyway, so but it's kind of apt in the sense that Sita just, she endures, so much. And Ram, also in terms of his pain of separation, right? Um, for the sake of Dharma, right? For the sake of the light side of the force, if you will. And I think that that's kind of understated a bit by some people that talk about this. And really, this pain of separation from the beloved really will figure in very heavily, very prominently in the later Bhakti movements, especially, say, for instance, in Lord Chaitanya's movement in the 14th century. Excuse me, 15th century, 15th, 16th century. So, but in Lord Chaitanya's movement, this pain of separation felt by Ram and Sita, for example, that is, and also by Radha and Krishna in the Krishna narratives, in the Bhagavad Purana, especially. This is the separation of love that that each individual soul may also experience in terms of the absence of clarity, absence of connection, right? Absence of awareness of one's connection with the divine, and awareness of one's unique relationship with the divine, awareness of one's own unique dharma, if you will, right? Because the idea is that each living being, right, particularly humans, but that all living beings have a unique dharma, right? Especially in relationship to the supreme, to the divine, right? And so, and again, according to which philosophical system one wants to privilege, the nature of that relationship, and the nature of the individual being and the divine being, that comes in, um, into focus, and is discussed in various ways. And we've already talked a little bit about that in the discussion on the Upanishads and the Vedas. One thing, and I'm about to close this, so no worries there. But again, keeping this shorter than some of my previous videos. But one thing that I want to emphasize, and I mentioned this in class, is that whereas the Vedas and the Upanishads are very much intellectual pursuits, right? Even today, the Ramayana and Mahabharata, these are beloved texts, and people revere these texts and revere these characters. Much the same way that in the Western world, for example, biblical figures are revered. And so that in 1985, for example, when the first full length, serial version, TV version of the Ramayana came out, people would decorate their televisions as altars, and watch the Ramayana, right? And treated it as a sacred event. So, you know, this, and when people in their villages and in their homes and so forth, when they're worshiping Rama and revering Rama and Sita, for example, they're not necessarily thinking, well, I'm really, 100% one with them. I'm just covered up by illusion or what have you. They're thinking, Rama is real, and Rama, you know, wants to protect me and loves me, and so on and so forth. Much the same way that, Christians revere Jesus, right? And various saints and so on and so forth, right? It's the same kind of idea. And in fact, we can talk about this more when we get to the Gospels. Jesus in Vaishnavism, in any case, is understood to be a partial avatar of Lord Vishnu. So Jesus is actually quite revered in India. In fact, Parashara Yogananda, um, it has this extensive, exhaustive analysis of the Gospels, in which he really bears the Gospel narratives out as yogic texts. And again, we'll talk about this with the Bhagavad Gita. The term yoga means to yoke oneself to the divine, right? So, in any case, that's a really brief run through on the Ramayana. Hope you enjoyed the text. Hope you revisit the text, um, and I hope that in some way, it becomes meaningful for you. All right. Thank you very much.